The chandelier light scattered across the ballroom like 1,000 tiny suns reflecting off champagne glasses and designer dresses. The air smelled of roasted pecans and polished silver. Music swelled from the grand piano near the stage. But beneath all that glitter, I stood at the edge of the room clutching a tray of hors d'oeuvres I didn't belong near. My brother Matthew, in his crisp tuxedo and smug grin, raised his glass and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That's my sister, a poor cleaning lady." His words split through laughter and crystal, and for a moment the entire room turned to look at me. I smiled, because that's what you do when the person who once held your hand as a child now uses your life as a punchline. I hadn't seen Matthew in 3 years, not since he took the last of our father's inheritance and turned it into a real estate empire with his fiancée's family. Tonight's party wasn't just any celebration. It was the launch of his new penthouse development, the Navarro. He'd named it after our family, the same name he said was too small when I asked him to invest in my cleaning business years ago. The room glittered with billionaires, socialites, and media photographers. I could see Forbes and Vanity Fair logos flashing on the press wall. My shoes, once white, were now faintly gray from years of bleach and dust. I was supposed to be invisible here, hired by the event planner for extra hands. No one was meant to know my last name matched the man being toasted. But Matthew always knew how to find the one way to twist the knife. He saw me when I tried to slip out the back. "Emma," he called out, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. Every head turned again. "Come on, don't be shy. Everyone meet my sister, the cleaning lady, I told you about." Polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. Someone murmured, "How humble," and another whispered, "Didn't she go bankrupt or something?" I felt my throat tighten, the weight of shame pressing into my chest. I wanted to disappear, but the air was too thick with judgment, too bright with pity. I walked toward him slowly, each step echoing louder than the music. "Nice party," I said, keeping my voice steady. He smirked. "Thanks, sis. I'd offer you a job cleaning up after, but I'm sure you're fully booked." Laughter exploded again, sharper this time. My hands trembled, but I gripped my tray tighter. My instinct was to throw the wine in his face, but I didn't. Years of scrubbing other people's floors had taught me that anger only leaves stains you can't wash out. Before I could respond, a ripple of silence passed through the room. Heads turned toward the entrance. A tall man in a dark navy suit stepped through the door, his presence cutting through the noise like a current. The whispers began immediately. "That's Richard Sterling. The billionaire investor owns half of Fifth Avenue." Matthew straightened his jacket, suddenly nervous. "Mr. Sterling," he said, rushing forward, "so glad you could make it." But Richard's eyes weren't on him. They were on me. He crossed the room, his expression calm but curious, like a man recognizing something others had missed. He stopped a few feet away and said in a voice smooth and steady, "Good evening, madam." Every conversation froze. The string quartet stopped mid-note. My brother blinked, confused. "Madam," he repeated, forcing a laugh. "You must be mistaken. She's—" Richard raised a hand lightly. "No mistake. We've met before. Miss Navarro once handled the restoration for my Upper East Side townhouse. I've never seen craftsmanship like hers. You saved pieces that were thought beyond repair." The room was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. Richard turned to Matthew, his gaze cool. "You should be proud. It's rare to meet someone who builds rather than borrows." My brother's face paled. The smirk vanished. He stammered, Of course. Emma's very dedicated." Richard smiled faintly. "Dedication is underrated in this city." Then to me, "Still running your own business?" I nodded, though my voice almost caught. "Yes, it's small but growing." He studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "Small things built with integrity last longer than empires built on ego." For a second, the world felt suspended. The laughter that had humiliated me minutes earlier now sounded hollow. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whom to side with, the billionaire or the brother. Matthew forced a grin, but his eyes betrayed him. "Well," he said stiffly, "why don't I get you another drink, Mr. Sterling?" Richard declined. "No, thank you. I just came to deliver a personal message." He turned back to me. We're restoring the historic Belmont Hotel downtown. I'd like your company to handle the interior conservation. You'll have full credit in the press release. My lips parted. You're serious? Of course, he said simply. You have a gift, Miss Navarro. One that deserves a larger stage. Before I could respond, someone clapped. Then another. Soon the applause spread through the room. Hesitant at first, then full and echoing. People who'd whispered behind my back moments ago now smiled, as if they'd known me all along. I didn't look at them. I looked at my brother. His jaw was tight, his eyes glinting with something between rage and regret. When the applause quieted, I turned to Richard and said, "Thank you. I'd be honored." He nodded once. "My office will call you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your evening, madam." And then he left just as quietly as he'd arrived. I took a deep breath, the air no longer feeling suffocating but sharp and new. The music started again, softer this time. Matthew stood motionless, his drink untouched. I placed the tray down on the nearest table, wiped my hands on the linen, and said calmly, "Looks like I've got work to do." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in years, my brother had nothing to say. As I walked toward the exit, I passed the table where a Forbes photographer stood. Frozen, his camera still raised. He asked almost in awe, "Can I get your name again, ma'am?" I turned slightly, smiled, and said, "Emma Navarro, founder of Clean Start Interiors." Outside, the night air hit my face like a baptism. The city lights shimmered, reflected in puddles from the earlier rain. Somewhere behind me, the laughter started up again, nervous, unsure, hollow. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd come to that party invisible, defined by someone else's story. I left it seen and for the first time in years truly clean. And that was how the world began to remember me, not as a cleaner, not as a victim, but as the woman who turned humiliation into her opening act. The morning after the party, the city looked the same, but I didn't. I woke in my tiny apartment above the laundromat on 46th Street, sunlight slipping through the blinds in narrow stripes across my bed. My phone buzzed, non-stop notifications, emails, calls. What I thought would fade overnight had already gone viral. A video clip titled "Billionaire Mistakes His Sister for a Maid, Then a Real Billionaire Calls Her Madam" was trending across every social platform. Over 1 million views in less than 12 hours. My name, Emma Navarro, plastered across gossip sites and business pages alike. The comments were split clean down the middle. Iconic moment. Justice served. She's milking her 5 minutes of fame. Where can I book her cleaning company Family Drama with designer dresses? I should have been thrilled. My business line was blowing up clients' inquiries, even sponsorship offers. But fame wasn't what it looked like from the outside. I felt exposed, like someone had peeled my life open and left it on display. By noon, I was sitting in my workshop, surrounded by buckets, brushes, and the smell of polish. My assistant Tessa burst through the door with her phone in hand. "Emma, it's everywhere," she said breathlessly. Forbes. The Post even. "Good Morning America wants to book you." I laughed softly. Not out of joy, but disbelief. For what? For standing there while my brother humiliated me. She smiled shyly. For handling it with class. Class. I'd learned that word didn't belong to money, it belonged to dignity. And last night, for the first time, I'd chosen mine. The workshop door opened again. It was Matthew. I didn't need to turn around to know his cologne cedarwood and entitlement. "Nice of you to show up," I said without looking at him. He stepped inside, his voice clipped. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I kept polishing the brass handle I'd been working on. He exhaled hard. "You made a scene." I turned slowly. "I made a scene. You dragged me into one." He looked around the modest space-worn workbenches, scattered tools, a coffee maker that sputtered more than brewed. "You could have stopped Sterling. You didn't have to make me look small." "Matthew," I said quietly, "you did that all by yourself." He bristled, glancing toward Tessa, who quickly excused herself and slipped out. "You think this little viral moment makes you better than me?" he sneered. "They're laughing at me now. My investors are calling. You humiliated me in front of half of New York." I set the handle down carefully. Funny, I said, that's exactly what you tried to do to me. He stared at me the same way he used to when we were kids, when he couldn't believe I'd talked back. You've changed, he said finally. I had to, I replied. Someone had to grow up. He took a step forward. You don't understand the damage you've done. Sterling's deal with my company is on hold. You think he helped you out of kindness? He did it to make a point. I tilted my head. Maybe the point needed to be made. For a long second he didn't speak. Then he said, almost pleading, we can fix this together. Publicly. Make it look like a misunderstanding. A family joke gone wrong. I stared at him, the same brother who once called me charity case behind my back, who'd bought me cleaning gloves for Christmas as a joke. And now he wanted damage control. I'm not your PR fix, I said. You built your empire on image, Matthew. I built mine on work. He ran a hand through his hair. You don't get it. This can ruin me. Then maybe it's time you learn what ruin feels like, I said softly. He froze. The words hit harder than I intended. His jaw tightened. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, picking up the handle again. But at least I'll regret something honest. He turned sharply and stormed out the door, slamming so hard the hanging tools rattled. When the sound faded, I realized my hands were shaking. Beneath all the calm, my heart was a storm. Tessa came back in quietly. You okay? I'm fine, I lied. Then after a beat, actually no. But I will be. By late afternoon, Richard Sterling's office called. His assistant's voice was precise, polite. Mr. Sterling would like to confirm your availability for a meeting tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. at Belmont Hotel, Conference Suite 3. I agreed, my throat dry. That night I couldn't sleep. The city outside buzzed with traffic and sirens, but my mind played back every word my brother had said. You made me look small. Maybe that's what he couldn't stand, that for the first time he wasn't the one holding the power. The next morning I dressed simply: beige slacks, white blouse, hair tied back. I didn't need to impress anyone. I just needed to show up as myself. Belmont Hotel was a cathedral of glass and quiet money. When I stepped into the marble lobby, people stared again, not with judgment this time, but curiosity. The same eyes that once looked down on me were now trying to measure who I was. Richard Sterling greeted me at the elevator, hand extended. Miss Navarro, I trust your morning's been less dramatic than your evening. I smiled faintly. You could say that. He led me to a meeting room overlooking Central Park. The table gleamed like a mirror. I'm sorry about last night, he said, sitting opposite me. I don't usually make public gestures, but I couldn't stand the hypocrisy. You didn't owe me anything, I said. Maybe not, he replied, but I believe people should be seen for what they build, not what they wear. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were architectural renderings and a contract. We're restoring the Belmont's original interior, marble, brass-stained oak. We need someone who understands preservation, not just renovation. That's you. I traced the designs with my fingertips. This is a major commission. He smiled. I prefer major integrity. For a moment I couldn't speak. I'd spent years working in silence, hoping someone might see more than the uniform, the dirt under my nails. And here finally someone did. Richard leaned back. You've been underestimated. That's a currency more valuable than pity, because it means you can surprise them. I met his eyes. You don't think this contract will look like charity? He shook his head. You earned it the moment you didn't flinch last night. I felt something shift inside me, not pride, but relief. He stood, offering his hand again. Welcome to the project, Miss Navarro. When I stepped back into the street, the wind caught my hair, and for the first time in years I felt taller, not because anyone elevated me, but because I'd stopped bending. That evening, as I locked up my workshop, I found a text waiting on my phone. You made me look weak. Matthew. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a blank message window, typed something, then deleted it. Instead, I sent a new message to Tessa. We got the Belmont contract. Tomorrow we start hiring. Minutes later, her reply came through, full of exclamation marks and joy. I smiled, set the phone down, and looked around the dim workshop, the brass, the wood, the faint smell of polish and persistence. Every scar, every stain, every slight that had once humiliated me now felt like proof of survival. The world had watched me being mocked and then watched me rise. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't risen above them. I'd simply stopped kneeling. And as the city lights flickered through my window, I realized something quietly beautiful. Sometimes the stain you can't wash off becomes the mark that makes you unforgettable. The contract sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I dared to sign it. Every morning I'd make coffee, sit down, and read it again, not because I didn't trust it, but because I didn't quite believe it was real. The Belmont Hotel restoration was the kind of project that could change everything: reputation, income, credibility. And still my hands trembled when I held the pen. When I finally signed it, the ink bled slightly on the paper, like my fear didn't want to let go just yet. Tessa arrived just as I slipped the folder into a leather case. "You look like someone about to walk into a fairy tale," she said, handing me a fresh latte. "More like a test," I replied. "Fairy tales have happy endings. Business meetings have fine print." We both laughed, but there was truth under the humor. I'd been burned before by contracts, by promises, by family. At 10 sharp, I arrived at the Belmont. Richard Sterling was already there, standing near the tall windows that framed the skyline like a living painting. He wore no tie this time, his sleeves slightly rolled up, the kind of ease that comes only with immense power or total self-control. "Miss Navarro," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "Welcome to your next chapter." He gestured for me to sit. "Before we get into the logistics, I wanted to tell you something." I raised a brow. "That sounds serious." "It is," he said. "I didn't hire you because of last week's spectacle. I hired you because I've seen your work before. You restored the old brownstone on 82nd, didn't you?" I blinked. "You've seen that I live 2 blocks away. I used to walk past it every morning. The woodwork was alive. You don't see that in New York anymore. People renovate, they don't restore. You restored." His words hit me harder than I expected. So few people notice details like that. He continued, "The Belmont deserves the same treatment. It's not just a building, it's a memory carved in marble. And I need someone who understands that." I nodded slowly. "Then we have the same goal." He smiled. "Good. Because I'm not easy to work for." "Neither am I said. That earned a low laugh from him, genuine and unguarded. "Excellent. Then maybe this will actually work." For the next hour, we went over project specs, sourcing artisans, matching materials, timelines. He was sharp, precise, yet deeply human. No arrogance, no theatrics. The kind of man who carried authority like a quiet shadow, not a weapon. When we finished, he leaned back. "There's one more thing," he said. "You'll need a larger team. I've arranged in advance enough to expand Clean Start, hire specialists, set up a small office on site." I stared at him. "That's a lot of trust for someone you barely know." He shrugged. "Trust isn't always earned in advance. Sometimes it's offered and you prove it right." I didn't know what to say. He stood and extended his hand again. "Congratulations, Miss Navarro. You're now the official restoration director for Belmont." I shook it, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." As I left the building, the city felt different. The sunlight hit the glass towers like they were cheering. For once, the world didn't feel like it was above me. It felt like it was finally level. By evening, the news had already spread. Forbes ran a short feature, "Former Cleaner Lands Multi-Million Restoration Deal." The comments this time weren't mockery. They were admiration, curiosity, and from a few anonymous accounts, envy. One message stood out: "Impressive. But remember, when the powerful notice you, it's never just because they're kind." No name. Just that. I tried to shake it off, but unease lingered. Success had never come without cost. The following week was chaos. I hired new artisans, architects, and designers, all women, most of them overlooked or underpaid in their fields. Clean Start transformed overnight from a humble cleaning service into a full-scale restoration firm. The night before construction began, I was in my workshop reviewing plans when Matthew showed up again. His voice echoed from the doorway. "Nice headline, Emma." I didn't look up. Don't start. He stepped closer. You think this billionaire's your savior? Sterling doesn't do charity. He's a predator. You're just another investment. I exhaled slowly. Matthew, you've spent your life mistaking opportunities for manipulation because you only ever manipulated. He frowned. You don't get it. You're walking into his world now. They'll eat you alive. Maybe, I said. But at least I'll know what I'm being eaten for. He sighed, shaking his head. You really think you're different. You think because you scrub floors you're morally superior. Let me tell you something, Emma. Money doesn't change people. It shows who they've been all along. I finally looked at him. Then maybe that's exactly why you're terrified. He didn't respond. He just stared for a moment, then left without another word. The door closed softly, but his warning hung in the air like dust. The next morning I walked into the Belmont site at dawn. The grand lobby was stripped bare marble floors covered in dust sheets, light filtering through scaffolding like gold through fog. I ran my hand along the banister, the same one my father once showed me when we came here decades ago. This place, he'd said then, was built to last. Maybe now it finally would again. As the workers gathered around, I gave the opening briefing. We're not erasing history, I said. We're bringing it back to life. Every crack, every scratch tells a story. We'll polish them, not hide them. They nodded, listening. In their eyes, I saw reflection women who'd been dismissed like I had been. Together, we were going to clean more than marble. We were going to clean the system. By noon, the sound of chisels and brushes filled the hall. I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed a sponge, and joined them. It felt right to be shoulder to shoulder, not above. When Richard arrived later, he didn't interrupt. He just watched quietly for a while, hands in pockets. Then he said, "You work harder than anyone I've ever hired." I smiled faintly. "That's because no one's ever handed me anything." He nodded. "Then let's make sure what you build can't be taken away." As he walked off, I looked around the space, the dust, the light, the hum of labor, and felt something click inside me. For years, I'd been cleaning up other people's messes, trying to survive their mistakes. Now I was rebuilding something of my own. And for the first time, I realized what real power was. Not being feared, not being praised, but being needed for the truth you bring back to the surface. The city outside roared with traffic, but inside the Belmont, the only sound that mattered was the rhythm of brushes against stone, like the heartbeat of a second chance. 2 weeks into the Belmont restoration, the air inside the old hotel smelled of dust, citrus oil, and quiet ambition. The scaffolding rose like a skeleton of progress, each beam holding the weight of a dream I wasn't sure I was ready to carry. We were ahead of schedule. The marble columns gleamed again, their veined white surface free of grime and time. Workers moved with rhythm brushes, drills' voices, blending into something that sounded almost like hope. I was in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back, wearing my usual gray work shirt. No makeup, no jewelry, just purpose. Tessa ran up the steps, slightly breathless. "Emma Sterling's on site, and he's not alone." I looked up. Richard was walking toward me, flanked by 2 sharply dressed investors and a woman in a black dress who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a financial magazine. She smiled the way glass catches light, beautiful but cold. Miss Navarro. Richard greeted that calm, even tone he always carried. "Meet Victoria Lang. She's leading the public relations side for the Belmont project." Victoria extended her hand, her eyes scanning me up and down before settling on my work boots. "Pleasure," she said. Her smile practiced. "I've heard quite the story about you." "Good things, I hope," I said lightly, though I could already sense the edge beneath her words. "Oh, fascinating things," she replied. "You've become something of a folk hero online. The cleaner who put a billionaire in his place. Very cinematic." Richard gave her a look, half warning, half amusement. "Victoria," he said, "let's remember why we're here." She turned back to me. "Of course. I'm simply noting the narrative. Every restoration needs a good story to go with it." Story. The way she said it made my stomach twist. I wasn't a headline. I was a person who'd clawed her way back to dignity. But to people like her, dignity was just another PR angle. Richard gestured toward the grand staircase. Can we show them the progress? I nodded and led the group up. The marble gleamed faintly under the afternoon sun, filtering through stained glass. We've restored 90% of the railwork, I explained. The brass was corroded, but we preserved most of the original material. Only replaced what was beyond saving. Beautiful, Richard said softly. Victoria touched one of the pillars, her manicured nails tapping lightly. So this is where you started from the bottom, she said, her tone half curious, half dismissive. I didn't flinch. No, I said calmly. I started lower than that. This is where I stopped falling. For a moment, silence hung between us. Richard's eyes flickered toward me. Not pity, not surprise, but something close to respect. We moved on to the main ballroom where workers were stripping years of paint from the moldings. One of the men accidentally dropped a tool, the sharp clang echoing like thunder. Everyone flinched. I crouched to pick it up and said softly, "It's okay. We make mistakes. We fix them. That's the job." Richard watched me, then said to the group, "This is why she's here. She doesn't just rebuild rooms, she rebuilds people." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Touching, she said, "But sentiment doesn't pay investors." "Neither does arrogance," I replied before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then Richard chuckled under his breath. "Remind me never to argue with you, Miss Navarro." When the tour ended, Victoria shook my hand again. "You're impressive," she said smoothly. "But a word of advice: when the press starts calling you a miracle worker, don't start believing it." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. After they left, Tessa found me still standing in the ballroom, my heart pounding. "You were amazing," she said. "You didn't let her get to you." "Maybe," I said quietly. But she wasn't wrong. The higher you rise, the easier it is to forget how far the ground is. She reminded me that even in the world of high finance, some people are only there to sweep up the mess. That evening, as I locked up, I found a note taped to the workshop door, no envelope, just my name in clean handwriting. "He's using you. The Belmont is just a test. Be careful." No signature. I turned it over, checking for clues, but there was nothing. My stomach tightened. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the window with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the skyline. Every success in my life had come with a shadow, attached a price waiting to be paid. Maybe this was no different. The next morning, the phone rang just after sunrise. It was Richard. "Can you come to my office?" he asked. His tone was even, but I caught something beneath it: tension. When I arrived, his assistant led me through a hallway lined with black and white photographs of New York in the 1920s. The man behind the desk wasn't the composed billionaire from the site. He looked tired, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up again. "There's a situation," he said, sliding a printed email across the desk. It was from an anonymous account. "Did you know your new partner was fired from the Chamberlain contract for theft?" I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. "That's a lie." "I know," Richard said calmly. "But rumors don't care about truth. Victoria got this email too. She's worried about optics." "Optics," I repeated bitterly. "Of course." He leaned forward. "I don't care what people say, Emma. I hired you because you're the best. But the board will ask questions. I need you to be prepared for that." "Do you believe me?" I asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely." Something in me broke a little at that word, believe. No one had used it with my name in years. I stood, steadying my breath. "Then let me prove it. The work will speak for itself." He smiled faintly. "I have no doubt." As I walked out of his office, I caught a glimpse of Victoria in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. She met my gaze, smiled politely, and turned away. I didn't know if she was behind the rumor, but one thing was clear: someone didn't want me here. That night, as I scrubbed old paint from the Belmont's tiles, I caught my reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, rough hands, a face that had learned how to survive both dirt and doubt. I whispered to my reflection, "You've cleaned harder messes than this." The echo of old wounds still pulsed beneath my skin, but so did something stronger resolve. If they wanted to test me, they'd see soon enough. I wasn't just cleaning a building. I was polishing the truth until it blinded them. 3 days after the rumor broke, the whispers had already reached the boardroom. The Belmont site still buzzed with work, but beneath the drills and sanders, there was another sound, the murmur of doubt. I could feel it in the way people hesitated when I walked past, the way conversations paused mid-sentence. By noon, even Tessa looked uneasy. "Emma," she said, handing me her phone, "you should see this." The headline hit like a slap. "Billionaire's new Cinderella hides a shady past, ex-employer speaks out." The article was filled with half-truths and carefully twisted sentences. According to it, I'd been dismissed years ago for mismanaging funds during a private renovation project. There were no facts, only insinuations. My chest tightened as I scrolled. The comments section was worse. Knew it was too good to be true. She probably cleaned her way into his bank account. Once a cleaner, always a cleaner. It was like watching my name being buried under digital dirt. When I looked up, Richard Sterling was standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable calm as always, but his eyes carried the faint fatigue of someone constantly managing fires. "Emma," he said softly, "let's talk." I followed him to a quiet corner of the lobby where the afternoon light spilled through stained glass in muted golds and blues. He handed me a printed copy of the article. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. "But I want to hear it from you." I steadied my breath. "It's not true. The Chamberlain project ended because the client's finances collapsed. They never paid us, and when I refused to walk away without paying my workers, they blacklisted me. That's the only crime I committed." He nodded slowly. "That sounds exactly like you." "Then why does it still hurt so much to say it out loud?" I whispered. "Because lies stick easier than truth," he said quietly. "Especially when they're convenient." He slipped the paper back into his coat pocket. "I'll handle the press. You handle the marble." For a long second, I couldn't speak. "You still trust me, Emma," he said, meeting my eyes. "You're the only one here who never pretends to be cleaner than they are." That afternoon, I worked harder than ever scrubbing supervising directing crews until my hands ached and my voice was hoarse. Sweat stung my eyes, but I refused to stop. If the world wanted to drag my name through mud, I'd answer with polish. By evening, when the site emptied out, I walked the hallways alone. The silence was heavy, thick with history. My father used to tell me that marble was deceptive. It looked smooth, but the pores always held traces of the past. Everything hides something, he used to say, but it's what you do with what's hidden that defines you. As I ran my hand across the stone, I thought about that. Maybe the rumors were just another layer of grime to clean. The next morning when I arrived, Victoria Lang was waiting by the main entrance. She wore sunglasses despite the dim light and smiled as if the last 3 days had been entertainment, not chaos. "Rough week?" she asked casually. "Some people prefer to work instead of gossip," I said, brushing past her. She followed. "Don't get defensive, Emma. These things happen. The press needs a villain to balance the narrative. You were too perfect, the hard-working underdog, the sister who embarrassed a rich man. People love to build you up just so they can tear you down." I turned to face her. "And what do you need, Victoria?" She smiled thinly. "Just a story that sells." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back at me. "Be careful. The same spotlight that flatters you can burn you alive." She walked away, her heels echoing through the empty hall. The next few days passed in quiet defiance. Every insult online, every whisper at the site, I met with silence and work. The crew followed my lead, heads down, brushes up. Even the marble seemed to cooperate, revealing its hidden veins, its stubborn shine. But on Friday afternoon, everything changed again. Tessa ran toward me, breathless. "You need to see this." She handed me her tablet. A new video had surfaced, grainy security footage from the Belmont's early construction phase. It showed a woman in a work uniform leaving the site late at night carrying a small bag. The caption read, "Caught red-handed Navarro removing company property." My stomach turned cold. That's not me, I said. Tessa frowned. I know. The timestamp doesn't even match your shifts. But people won't care. And they didn't. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Even the workers avoided eye contact. By sunset, the board issued a statement. Pending investigation, Miss Navarro's on-site access is temporarily suspended. Suspended. I stood in the half-lit lobby, the place that had started to feel like mine, and watched as the security guard gently took my badge. Richard wasn't there. Victoria was. She leaned against the wall, her expression unreadable. It's temporary, she said softly. These things blow over. Did you do this? I asked. She tilted her head. Why would I? You're the project's face. But faces fade. Legacies last. That night I returned to my apartment, small, quiet, smelling faintly of cleaning solution and loneliness. I sat at the table, staring at my phone. Messages poured in from reporters, strangers, even old coworkers offering sympathy wrapped in curiosity. But there was one message that made me freeze. It was from a private number. You were warned. He's not who you think. Attached was a single photo, Richard Sterling shaking hands with my brother Matthew. The world tilted for a moment. The two men, one who'd mocked me, one who'd believed in me, together, smiling like old friends. I dropped the phone, my pulse roaring in my ears. For the first time since that humiliating night at the party, I wasn't angry. I was afraid. Maybe the dirt wasn't under my name after all. Maybe it was under the marble I'd been trying so hard to clean. The photo burned in my mind long after I deleted it. Richard Sterling and Matthew Navarro, my brothers shaking hands like two men who'd never known the word betrayal. By morning I hadn't slept. The city outside my window was gray and restless, the kind of day that felt like it already knew bad news was coming. At 8, I walked into the Belmont site anyway. My badge no longer worked, but I knew the guard, Paul. He looked torn, apologetic. Miss Navarro, he said quietly. You're not supposed to. I just need 5 minutes, I said. Then I'll leave. He hesitated, then nodded. 5. The building felt different now, colder, heavier. I could hear the workers upstairs, but I stayed in the lobby looking up at the chandelier I'd personally restored 2 weeks ago. It glimmered faintly in the dusty light, unaware of the chaos below it. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Richard. He looked surprised to see me. Emma, he said slowly. You shouldn't be here until this clears. I need to know the truth, I said. He frowned. About what? I held out my phone, showing him the picture. About this. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. Where did you get that? It doesn't matter, I said. What matters is why. Why were you meeting with my brother? For a long time, he said nothing. Then he exhaled and walked toward the window. Matthew came to me before the project started, he said finally. He wanted in on the investment. He knew you were part of the proposal. And you said yes, I said bitterly. No, he said. I told him I don't mix business with family grudges. But he wouldn't drop it. He kept showing up, calls, dinners, promises to fund the expansion. I ignored him. Then why the photo? He turned back to me. Because he showed up unannounced at a fundraiser last month. Cameras everywhere. I shook his hand to keep the scene from escalating. Nothing more. Do you expect me to believe that I asked quietly? Emma, look at me. His voice softened. If I wanted to use you, I wouldn't have stood by you when everyone else ran. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the part of me that had been humiliated, mocked, and discarded too many times didn't know how to trust anymore. He saw the doubt in my face and sighed. Come by my office this afternoon, he said. There's something I want you to see. Then he left, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving me alone with a silence that felt like accusation. When I returned home, the online storm had only grown worse. My inbox was flooded with interview requests, accusations, and one chilling headline, Navarro family feud billionaire, caught between siblings. I sat on the floor, head in my hands. For years I had kept my name small, quiet, unremarkable. Now it was a weapon everyone wanted to swing. By 3, I went to Sterling's office. The receptionist gave me a wary look but didn't stop me. Richard was waiting, a file open on his desk. He handed it to me. Read. Inside were internal emails, contracts, even legal correspondence, all signed by Matthew. He'd been feeding false information to one of the subcontractors selling early design access for cash. He'd forged documents using my name to make it look like I'd approved it. My stomach dropped. He framed me. Richard nodded. The security footage was doctored using that same contractor's access. Your brother hired them. I sank into the chair. Why he thought ruining your reputation would make you desperate enough to sell your company, Richard said. He told one of the investors he wanted clean start, under the family name again. Anger rose in my throat like smoke. He always said I'd come crawling back. Richard's voice was steady. He's wrong. I looked up at him. Why show me this now? Because you deserve to see the dirt before you start cleaning it, he said. And because I know what betrayal looks like, it's always dressed as opportunity. I stared at the papers, my hands shaking. Can we prove this? He nodded. Already did. My lawyers are preparing the counterstatement. But the question is, what do you want to do about it? I looked out the window. The city shimmered in a late afternoon haze, every skyscraper like a reflection of choices, rise or collapse. I'm not hiding anymore, I said finally. I want this public. Richard nodded. Then it's your call. I'll back you. That night I recorded a statement, simple, unpolished, honest. I spoke straight to the camera, no makeup, no PR spin. I started as a cleaner. I still am one. But this time, I'm cleaning up lies, not floors. My brother tried to drag me back into a world I left behind. He failed because truth, like marble, doesn't stay buried forever. We released it at dawn. Within hours, it spread faster than any rumor ever could. The headline flipped: Billionaire's partner exposes family sabotage. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was reacting, I was leading. By evening, reporters camped outside my workshop. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. But I kept walking, chin high. One voice called out, Miss Navarro, do you have anything to say to your brother? I stopped, turned slightly toward the lights. Yes, I said clearly. Thank you for reminding me what I never want to become. The crowd fell silent. I walked away. Later that night, Richard called. You handled that perfectly, he said. It wasn't perfect, I said softly. It was necessary. He paused. Emma, there's something else. The board reinstated you. You're officially back on the project. I closed my eyes. Thank you. He paused. No. Thank you. For teaching us what accountability looks like. When I hung up, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the city lights flicker like stars that refused to die. My name was no longer a stain. It was a mirror, and anyone who looked too closely would have to see their own reflection in it. The day I returned to the Belmont, the crew paused mid-work as I walked through the doors. For a moment, everything went silent. Brushes frozen, mid-air, drills stopped humming, even the dust seemed to settle in mid-flight. Then one by one they started clapping. I wasn't ready for that sound. I'd imagined coming back quietly, head down, letting the work speak. But as the applause filled the marble hall, I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, every person who'd ever been dismissed, doubted, or discarded, and came back stronger. Tessa ran to hug me. We knew you'd clear your name, she said, her voice trembling. I smiled, though the relief felt heavy. Let's get back to work. These columns won't polish themselves. We laughed. And just like that, the noise of progress returned, the sound of something being reborn. By afternoon, Richard showed up, tie-loosened expression softer than I'd ever seen. You sure you're ready to be back so soon? He asked. I've been ready since the day I was suspended, I said. He smiled. Then let's make history. As we walked through the site, I noticed how differently people looked at me now, not as the cleaning lady who got lucky, but as a leader. Still, fame is a fickle mirror. It flatters, then distorts. Later, as the day wound down, I joined Richard in the old ballroom where sunlight poured through the tall windows like liquid gold. The marble underfoot gleamed again, every flaw turned to beauty. "You were right," he said quietly, looking around. "You don't hide the cracks. You highlight them. That's how you know something survived," I replied. He turned to me, studying my face for a moment. "Do you ever think survival has a price?" I tilted my head. "Everything does. The trick is deciding what you're willing to pay." He nodded but didn't respond. Something in his eyes, a flicker of conflict, maybe guilt, made me uneasy. Before I could ask, his phone buzzed. He stepped aside to answer, his tone low, sharp, almost nervous. When he hung up, he avoided my gaze. "Just a board matter," he said. "Nothing for you to worry about." I didn't press, but the unease lingered. That evening, when the crew left, I stayed behind. I walked through the hallways, checking the work. The building felt alive again, but beneath the restored elegance, I could feel tension like a cord stretched too tight. In the quiet, I noticed a folder someone had left on one of the work tables. It wasn't labeled, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were budget sheets, payment logs, and internal memos. My name appeared multiple times: Navarro allocation, consulting retainer, supplementary fees. Only the numbers didn't match the actual payments I'd received. Someone had been moving money through my name again. I froze, scanning the pages. The transactions were routed through an offshore account tied to Belmont's holding company, Sterling Capital Holdings. Richard's name was on every approval line. My hands went cold. The betrayal stung differently this time, quieter, heavier, almost numb. I remembered his words: "Trust isn't always earned in advance. Sometimes it's offered." Was that what this was? A test of how easily I'd look away. I copied the documents onto my phone, tucked the folder back where I found it, and left without a word. That night, the city lights outside my apartment window looked different, colder, almost artificial. I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at my phone, wondering if truth always had to come dressed in disappointment. By midnight, I called my lawyer, an old friend who'd once helped me save Clean Start from bankruptcy. I told him everything. "Keep your head down," he said. "And whatever you do, don't accuse him publicly yet. If you're right, that's corporate fraud. You'll need proof beyond internal documents." The next morning, I showed up at the site like nothing had changed. But inside, every conversation felt like glass. Richard arrived mid-morning. "Big day," he said, lightly. "We're doing a press walkthrough this afternoon. You'll be front and center." I smiled thinly. "Wouldn't miss it." As he turned away, my gaze lingered on him, the confident stride, the easy charm, the man who'd taught me to believe again. I wondered how many layers of polish it took to hide what was underneath. During the press walkthrough, cameras flashed, microphones angled toward me. "Miss Navarro," one reporter called out. "After all the controversy, how does it feel to be back?" I smiled for the cameras, like cleaning the truth was worth every scar. The crowd applauded. Richard nodded approvingly beside me. But when one journalist asked, "There are rumors of financial irregularities in the restoration budget," any comment, his expression shifted. "Completely baseless," he said smoothly. "Our records are transparent." Transparent. The word echoed in my mind like a dare. After the press left, I cornered him near the service hallway. "When were you planning to tell me about the offshore transfers?" I asked quietly. His eyes went cold. "You've been digging." "I had to," I said. "It's my name on those documents." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Emma, listen. This isn't what you think. The board needed liquidity. We used secondary channels. It's temporary. Using my name without my consent isn't temporary. It's a fraud." He stared at me, expression unreadable. "You're not naive enough to think big projects are clean. Every empire has dust under the rug." "Then maybe I don't belong in empires," I said. He stepped closer. "You fought your whole life to sit at this table. Don't flip it over now. I'm protecting you." "No," I said, voice trembling but steady. "You're protecting yourself." For a long, tense moment, neither of us moved. Then he said softly, "Be careful what you polish, Emma. Some stains are meant to stay hidden." He walked away, leaving me standing under the ballroom's golden light, the same light that once made me feel seen. Now it just felt harsh, exposing everything I didn't want to believe. I looked up at the chandelier again, its surface flawless. But in the reflection I saw myself, and realized that even marble can lie if the polish is thick enough. The next step would cost me everything I'd rebuilt. But clean hands, I decided, were worth the price. The following morning, New York felt colder than usual, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones even when the sun's out. I walked to the Belmont alone, coffee in hand, mind heavy with the weight of what I knew. The closer I got, the louder the hammering and drilling grew, proof that the world kept building even when trust fell apart. Tessa met me at the door. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked. "Not much," I admitted. "We need to finish the West Wing ceiling by tomorrow." She gave me a look. "You're avoiding something." I sighed. "Avoiding a fight I don't want to start." All morning I worked without stopping, checking tile patterns, supervising new hires, keeping busy so I wouldn't think. But silence is its own form of confrontation. And by noon, it became unbearable. I left the tools on the table and walked straight to the security office. Paul looked up from his monitors. "Morning, Miss Navarro. I need access to the financial archives," I said. "The invoices, the payment logs, everything tied to Sterling Holdings." He hesitated. "That's above my clearance." "Then unlock what you can," I said. "Please." Paul studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You've earned that much." He handed me a visitor pass. The storage room was buried 2 floors underground, the air thick with dust and old secrets. Rows of labeled boxes lined the shelves, stretching into shadow. I found the files I needed, Belmont Project Phase 2, and spread them across a metal table. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. The offshore transfers were just the beginning. Money had been rerouted through shell companies disguised as consulting fees. Every signature led back to Sterling Capital Holdings, and every justification was tied to expedited project logistics. Only there were no logistics, just numbers that didn't add up. I photographed everything, hands trembling slightly when I heard footsteps in the hall. "Busy morning," a voice said from behind me. I turned. Victoria Lang stood in the doorway, arms crossed, an amused smile curling her lips. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Same as you," she said, "following the money. Don't pretend we're on the same side," I snapped. Her smile deepened. "I'm not pretending. I told you once, Emma, people love to build heroes so they can watch them fall. Richard's little redemption story. It's already cracking." I narrowed my eyes. "You're the one feeding the press again, aren't you?" She shrugged. "Information finds its way out. I just make sure it lands in the right hands." "Why?" "Because," she said, stepping closer, her voice low and sharp, "I've worked for men like him my whole life. They smile. They promise, they build, and they rot everything underneath. You're just another shiny distraction. But maybe you're smart enough to see it before he buries you too." I wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but the folder in my hand felt heavier than her words. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Proof," she said. "If you take him down, I'll make sure your company survives it. You'll be the one remembered for cleaning up the mess, not creating it." I stared at her. "You're offering to help me destroy him?" She smiled faintly. "No, I'm offering to help you tell the truth. What you call destruction, men like him call consequence." And with that she turned and walked away, her heels clicking down the corridor like a countdown. By late afternoon, I sat alone in the empty ballroom, the evidence spread before me. Richard's voice still echoed in my memory. "Be careful what you polish, Emma." He hadn't been warning me. He'd been confessing. When he arrived later that evening, I was still there waiting. "You've been busy," he said carefully, glancing at the papers. "So have you," I replied. He stepped forward, every movement measured. "I can explain." "Then start." He sighed, sitting across from me. The offshore accounts weren't about greed. They were leveraged. The board wanted to sell the Belmont's naming rights to a private investor in Dubai, turn it into another luxury shell. I couldn't let them. So I moved the funds. I protected the project. By lying. By surviving, he corrected. You think this city rewards honesty? It doesn't. It rewards control. I shook my head. You sound just like my brother. He flinched just slightly. I'm nothing like him. Then prove it, I said. Bring the documents to the authorities. Come clean. His eyes hardened. You don't understand the cost. I do, I said softly, because I've paid for it all my life. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. You'd ruin everything we built. What we built was never real if it needed lies to stand. He turned toward the window, voice low. You have no idea what happens when people like us fall out of favor. I'm not afraid of falling, I said. I've been on the ground before. He looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time I saw something crack behind his composure, fear, maybe even regret. Finally, he said, You won't go public. You care too much about this project. Maybe I do, I said, but I care more about the truth. He stared at me for a long time, then walked out without another word. You mistake my silence for agreement. I'm not playing your game anymore. When the door closed, I sank to the floor, exhausted. For years I'd thought cleaning was about making things shine. But real cleaning, real honesty meant tearing through polish and facing what you didn't want to see. Later that night, I uploaded the documents to a secure drive and sent copies to 3 people: my lawyer Tessa and an anonymous journalist who'd once written about workplace exploitation. Then I turned off my phone and sat in the dark, the city glowing faintly through the windows. The truth was out there now, loose and alive like cracks spreading through glass. And I knew when it shattered, none of us would walk away unscathed. The morning it hit the news, I knew before I saw it. My phone buzzed, nonstop calls, texts, notifications. I didn't need to open any of them. The truth, once unleashed, doesn't knock politely. It breaks the door off its hinges. When I finally checked, the headline glared from every screen: Sterling Capital accused of fraudulent transfers in Belmont restoration project. The article quoted anonymous sources and leaked documents, my documents. The journalist hadn't used my name, but everyone knew. Every interview I'd done, every photo of me beside Richard Sterling, it all connected fast. By 9 a.m., the Belmont was swarming with reporters. Flashbulbs burst like small explosions as I stepped out of the cab. Tessa tried to shield me, but it was useless. Miss Navarro, did you leak the documents? Were you part of the scheme? Did you and Sterling have a falling out? Their words sliced like blades, fast and sharp. I kept walking, jaw tight, heart hammering. Inside the lobby felt foreign. My sanctuary turned into a battlefield. Workers whispered as I passed. I caught fragments. She turned him in. I heard she's testifying. Can you believe she fooled him? I wanted to scream that I hadn't fooled anyone, that I'd only told the truth, but truth never travels as fast as spectacle. Richard's office door was half open when I reached it. He was standing by the window phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, too calm. Yes, I've seen it. No, we're handling it internally. The allegations are baseless. He hung up slowly, then turned to me. You did this. I closed the door behind me. The world deserved to know. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room thickened. You think they care about the truth? They'll eat you first. Then at least I won't choke on lies, I said. He walked closer, each step deliberate. You've destroyed everything. The board's in panic, the investors are pulling out, and the press is circling like vultures. You think you're some kind of hero? I think I'm done being silent. He laughed once, short and hollow. You sound just like I used to before I learned better. I met his eyes. Then maybe that's your problem. You stopped learning. He stared at me for a long, unbearable moment. Then his tone softened. Emma, listen to me. You have no idea what comes next. They'll turn this into a circus. You'll be painted as the naive accomplice who got used. And when the dust settles, I'll survive. You won't. I don't need survival if it means living like this, I said quietly. I'd rather start over with nothing. For the first time, I saw him falter. His shoulders sagged, his voice barely above a whisper. You think honesty saves you. It doesn't. It just isolates you. Maybe, I said, turning for the door. But at least I'll be clean. He didn't stop me. He just said, "You're not built for this world, Emma." I paused, hand on the doorknob. Neither is the world built for women who don't bend. By noon, the story had evolved into chaos. Newscasters dissected every word of my old interviews. Stock prices dropped. Sterling Capital issued a statement suspending Richard pending investigation. I watched it all unfold from my workshop, the same place where it had begun. Tessa sat beside me, scrolling through her phone. "They're calling you the whistleblower," she said softly. "Half the internet's praising you. The other half's calling you a traitor." "Both sides are probably right," I murmured. The workshop phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Miss Navarro," a man's voice said. "This is Detective Marlowe, Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to schedule an interview regarding the Sterling case. Mr. Sterling has named you as a co-conspirator." My blood ran cold. "What he claims, you authorized several of the wire transfers," the detective said. "We have your signature on the approvals." My heart dropped. "Those were forged." "That's what we need to confirm," he said. "Can you come in tomorrow at 10 a.m.? "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll be there." When the call ended, Tessa's face had gone pale. "He's turning it on you." "Of course he is," I whispered. "That's what men like him do. They clean their hands with other people's names." That night I went home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. I froze, listening. Inside, nothing moved. My pulse pounded as I stepped inside. Papers lay scattered across the floor, my business records, contracts, tax forms. Someone had searched the place. In the middle of the mess sat a single envelope, no address, no seal. Inside was a note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "You wanted the truth. Now you'll pay for it." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was Richard's. I sank onto the couch, shaking. This wasn't a story anymore. It was a war. The next morning I put on my simplest clothes, a plain navy dress, no jewelry, and went to the precinct. The detectives were polite but cold. They asked the same questions over and over, circling like sharks. When it ended, one of them said, "You're either the cleanest person in this room, Miss Navarro, or the smartest liar." "I'll take the first one," I said, standing up. Outside, cameras waited again. The flash burned my eyes. But this time I didn't hide. I looked straight at them and said, "The truth always costs something, but I can afford it." The footage aired that night. Commentators debated my guilt, my courage, my motives. But under the noise, something else began to shift. Whistleblowers from other Sterling projects came forward, builders, accountants, consultants. My lawyer called me near midnight. "Emma," he said, "you started something." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The next day, as the headlines read, "Sterling Empire Crumbles Under Investigation," I stood outside the Belmont, looking up at the windows that caught the morning light. The marble still shone untouched by scandal, proof that beauty can survive even the ugliest truths. Tessa came up beside me. "What happens now?" I took a deep breath. "Now we finish what we started." She looked at me, puzzled. "Even after everything, especially after everything I said." The city hummed around us, indifferent, alive. For once I didn't feel small beneath it. The Polish had broken, and what was left underneath was real. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. The kind of place where people pretend justice is clean, even when it's dripping in politics. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly in my lap, while Richard Sterling took his seat across from me. He looked thinner than before, his perfect posture cracked, but the arrogance was still there, an echo of the man who once walked into rooms expecting applause. When his eyes met mine, he didn't blink. The judge entered, the bailiff called for silence, and suddenly every word I'd said, every decision I'd made for the past year, was about to be dissected under fluorescent lights. "Case number 4579, the clerk read aloud. "People versus Richard Sterling charges include embezzlement, fraud, and falsification of corporate documents. Witness, Emma Navarro." My name echoed in the chamber, and a strange calm washed over me. The prosecutor, A tall woman with clipped diction and eyes sharp as glass stood and began. Miss Navarro, you were the lead contractor on the Belmont restoration project, correct? Yes. And you discovered discrepancies in Sterling Capital's financial reports? Yes. When you brought these discrepancies forward, what was Mr. Sterling's response? He told me not to look too closely, I said. That some stains weren't meant to be cleaned. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor smiled faintly. And did you later learn that funds were moved through offshore accounts bearing your authorization signature? Yes. But those signatures were forged. Do you have proof? I nodded. Digital forensics confirmed metadata inconsistencies. The timestamps didn't match the login records. They were manufactured. Richard's attorney stood. Objection hearsay, unless the witness conducted the forensic analysis herself. The judge waved it off. Overruled. Continue. The questioning went on for an hour. I answered each with precision dates, documents, patterns. Every detail I'd memorized through sleepless nights. Every scar turned into evidence. Then came the defense. Richard's lawyer, smooth and smiling, approached like a man stepping onto a stage. Miss Navarro, he began. Voice syrupy, you've described yourself as a whistleblower. Would you say you have personal reasons for wanting Mr. Sterling's downfall? I stared at him. The only reason I have is the truth. He nodded slowly, then gestured toward the jury. Isn't it true that Mr. Sterling gave you your second chance, that he elevated you from cleaning staff to contractor? The words hit like a slap. I kept my tone steady. He offered me an opportunity. I earned everything that came after. He smiled. Of course. But perhaps you felt indebted or resentful, maybe even betrayed, when you weren't given more recognition. Across the room, Richard watched me, expression unreadable. I leaned forward. Voice firm. The only betrayal that happened was his against the truth, against every worker who built that project with their hands. The lawyer's smirk faded. Miss Navarro, did you not sign an NDA barring you from discussing company matters publicly? I did. But NDAs don't protect against crimes. A few people in the back clapped softly before the judge hushed them. The defense lawyer sighed dramatically. So despite your own contract, you decided to leak confidential documents to the press. Isn't that right? I hesitated, knowing this was the trap. Yes, I said finally, because silence would have made me complicit. Ah, he said, pretending sympathy. So you chose moral righteousness over loyalty? No, I replied. I chose integrity over fear. The courtroom went still. Even the judge looked up from her notes. The defense rested. Richard never took the stand that day. He just sat there unblinking while his empire unraveled in front of him. When the session adjourned, I stepped out into the hallway, the air thick with camera flashes and questions. Emma, did you plan the leak? Are you testifying against him voluntarily? Do you regret working with Sterling? I paused only once, turning toward the cameras. I don't regret cleaning up the truth, I said. I regret that it took this long. The clip went viral before the trial even ended. By the second week, former employees from Sterling Capital came forward, engineers, accountants, assistants. Each one told a different version of the same story. Manipulation, falsified numbers, threats. My testimony had been the crack that finally split open the glass. When Richard finally took the stand, the air changed. He looked tired but defiant, his suit immaculate, his tone icy. I built everything you see, he said. The Belmont, the jobs, the partnerships, and he pointed at me. She destroyed it for a headline. The prosecutor rose instantly. You mean she exposed your crimes for accountability? He sneered. She exposed ambition. The world doesn't punish lies. It punishes weakness. For the first time, I saw it clearly. The man behind the polish, built entirely from mirrors, terrified of his own reflection. When the verdict came 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. The judge's voice was firm, almost weary. On the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and falsification, this court finds the defendant Richard Sterling guilty. A hush fell. Then a rush of whispers, gasps, the shuffle of cameras. Richard's face drained of color. his hand gripping the edge of the table like it could keep him standing. He turned to me, eyes hollow. "You think you've won?" he murmured. "They'll turn on you next." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But I'll be standing in the light when they do." He was led away in handcuffs, the sound of metal on wood echoing through the room. Outside, the world erupted headlines, news alerts, analysts dissecting every word. Sterling guilty. Whistleblower vindicated. The cleaning lady who cleaned house. Tessa met me on the courthouse steps, breathless tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered. I looked up at the skyline. New York stretched wide and glittering, impossibly alive. "No," I said softly. "It's just clean." That night I returned to the Belmont. The marble floors shimmered under the soft light, untouched by scandal or time. I walked through the empty ballroom, fingertips brushing the cool surface of the walls I'd once restored. At the far end hung a framed photo from the opening ceremony, me and Richard both smiling. I took it down carefully, turned it over, and with a pen wrote one line on the back. "Some messes are meant to be made." Then I left it face down on the table and walked out into the quiet night. The city breathed, and for the first time in years, I did too. The lights from the Waldorf shimmered across Fifth Avenue like liquid gold, spilling over the polished cars and expensive shoes of New York's elite. Tonight was the city's Restoration Gala, an annual spectacle of wealth and philanthropy where men like Richard Sterling once ruled the stage, but this year his name was gone from the guest list. Mine was at the top. I arrived alone. The driver opened the door of a modest black sedan, not a limousine. Cameras flashed anyway. The reporters weren't sure whether to treat me as a scandal or a success story. "Miss Navarro," one called. "Is it true you've been offered a feature on Forbes' Women Who Rebuilt America list?" I smiled faintly. "Ask me again tomorrow." Inside the ballroom was alive with the hum of conversation, crystal clinking, and the faint scent of roasted apples drifting from the catering tables. Everything gleamed, chandeliers, sequined gowns, ambition. It was exactly the kind of room my brother used to love, the kind that turned people into performances. Tessa met me near the entrance, wearing a deep emerald dress and an expression that mixed pride with disbelief. "You actually came," she whispered. "After everything I said, I wouldn't miss it." She handed me a name tag. It read, "Emma Navarro Belmont Restoration Initiative." I pinned it to my dress and exhaled. Across the room, I caught glimpses of people who'd once whispered behind my back, executives, editors, socialites. They were all smiles now, the kind that said, "We never doubted you," even though they had. I'd learned something about forgiveness. It doesn't need witnesses. At 8 o'clock sharp, the lights dimmed and a spotlight landed on the stage. The host's voice rang out smooth and rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate resilience, the people who rebuild when others destroy. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Emma Navarro." For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. Then applause rose around me, louder, steadier than I expected. I walked to the podium, my heels clicking softly against the decorative stone floor. The same kind of silence filled the room that had filled the courtroom weeks ago, expectant, brittle. "Good evening," I began. A year ago, I walked into a room not unlike this one, but that night someone introduced me as a cleaning lady. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, nervous and curious. "And they weren't wrong," I continued. "I am one. I clean, just not the way they meant. Some of us clean spaces, others clean names, some clean the truth. But all of it matters." The laughter faded into stillness. When the Belmont restoration fell into scandal, people told me to disappear, to protect myself, to wait for things to blow over. But I didn't come this far to hide behind silence again. I paused, scanning the faces. In the third row, I saw a man I didn't expect, Marcus, one of Sterling's former investors. His expression was tense, unreadable. "So I told the truth," I said. "And it nearly destroyed me. But it also cleaned out everything that wasn't real, every false friend, every broken promise, every illusion of success. The truth didn't ruin my life. It revealed it." The applause this time was spontaneous, rising like a wave. When it faded, I went on. "We talk about rebuilding like it's just construction, but it's not. It's a choice. You can build from fear, or you can build from integrity. One stands, the other rots. The host nodded from the wings. Cameras clicked. I finished with the line I'd written weeks ago, scribbled on a napkin after another sleepless night. The next time someone calls you a cleaning lady, tell them thank you. The world could use more people willing to sweep away what no one else will touch. The room rose to its feet. When I stepped off the stage, people reached out hands. Congratulations, promises. It was overwhelming, dizzying. But amid the chaos, I noticed someone at the far end of the room. He stood apart from the crowd, dressed in a charcoal suit, hair silver at the temples. The billionaire who'd called me madam at my brother's party. He approached slowly, the noise around us dimming like the world had decided to listen. "Miss Navarro," he said, voice warm, familiar. "You've had quite a year." I smiled. "So they tell me." He chuckled. "When I met you that night, I knew there was something deliberate about your silence. Now I see it wasn't silence, it was strength." "Sometimes they look the same," I said. He nodded. "I'd like to discuss a proposal. A foundation funded by my firm, led by you. It's time the city rebuilt with people who actually care about more than profit." I blinked. "You're serious, Deadly," he said. "You've already proven what integrity looks like under fire. I'd like to see what it looks like in leadership." Before I could reply, the room erupted again, this time with the arrival of someone unexpected. My brother. Matthew walked in wearing a navy tuxedo, the same smirk that had once made me feel 12 years old again. The crowd parted like water as he strolled toward me. Cameras followed instantly. "Well," he said loudly, "look who's cleaning up nicely." The laughter that followed was hesitant, uncertain. I met his gaze steadily. "You shouldn't be here." "Relax," he said. "I'm just here to celebrate with my family. Isn't that what tonight's about?" His tone dripped with mockery, but something in his eyes, tiredness, maybe regret, made me pause. "You've had your fun," I said quietly. "Leave it at that." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "You think you're better than the rest of us now? You're just a lucky scandal away from being forgotten." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But at least I'll be forgotten for something I believed in." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Anger, confusion, maybe even shame. Then he turned away. The billionaire stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "If you're here to make a scene, Mr. Navarro, I'd suggest you remember who this room listens to now." Matthew froze, realizing who he was speaking to. The cameras captured it all, the silence, the tension, the visible shift of power. And then, just like that night, months ago, the entire room froze again. Only this time it wasn't because I'd been mocked. It was because I'd been seen. When my brother finally left, the billionaire turned back to me. "You handled that with grace." "I've had practice," I said. He smiled. "So about that foundation. Shall we start tomorrow?" I looked around the room, the same kind of luxury that once made me feel invisible, and then back at him. "Tomorrow sounds good. But tonight, I think I'll just enjoy being here." He extended his arm, and for once I didn't hesitate to take it. As the orchestra began to play, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the mirrored wall, standing tall under the golden lights. No longer the woman mocked at a party, but one who had survived it, rebuilt, and risen above. The music swelled. The night glittered. And somewhere deep inside me, the little voice that once whispered, "You don't belong here," finally went silent. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than noise. The morning after the gala, my apartment was filled with its sunlight pooling on the floor, coffee gone cold on the counter, the city humming faintly outside. For the first time in years, there were no calls to return, no fires to put out, no one demanding an apology. Just stillness. I turned on the radio, half expecting to hear my name again, but instead there was jazz, soft, old, imperfect. The kind of music my mother used to play while scrubbing the kitchen floors of our tiny Bronx apartment. She'd hum along and say, "Cleaning isn't about making something look nice, Emma. It's about respect for the space, for the people who'll walk through it for yourself." I didn't understand it then. I do now. By noon, I was standing outside the Belmont again. The building looked different under winter light. Less like a monument, more like something alive. Workers were inside preparing for the reopening. My name wasn't on the plaque outside, but I didn't mind. It didn't need to be. Tessa joined me a few minutes later, bundled in her coat. "You're early," she said. "Habit," I replied, smiling. We walked through the lobby, the marble floors gleaming, the chandeliers reflecting fragments of daylight. The place smelled faintly of citrus and fresh paint. "They're naming the new wing after you," Tessa said. I stopped. "They shouldn't." She laughed. "Too late. The board voted this morning. The Navarro Hall. Has a nice ring, doesn't it?" I shook my head, overwhelmed. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real," she said softly. "So is this." She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a letter from the billionaire Michael Alden. "Emma, the foundation papers are ready. We've secured the first round of funding, $50 million dedicated to restoring historic landmarks, training women in trade skills, and supporting ethical contractors. The first office is yours to lead. Welcome home. M.A." I stared at the letter, tears stinging my eyes. "You think I can actually do this?" Tessa smiled. "Emma, you already did." Later that afternoon, the press gathered for the reopening ceremony. Cameras lined the red carpet, reporters clutching microphones like weapons. But this time I wasn't nervous. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause felt different, not polite, not performative, but warm, genuine. Last year I began this building, almost became another ruin. Not because of time or neglect, but because of what we forgot: integrity. I paused, letting the words sink in. The Belmont was never just about marble or glass. It was about people, about believing that even something broken can be made beautiful again. That's what cleaning really means. It's not erasing the past, it's preparing for what comes next. The crowd was silent. Then slowly they began to clap. After the ceremony, I slipped away from the noise, walking down one of the quiet corridors where the tiles still smelled faintly of dust and polish. I ran my fingers along the wall, remembering every fight, every insult, every night I'd worked until my hands ached. And then I smiled, because every inch of it was worth it. I didn't notice Michael until he spoke. "You gave them something to believe in." I turned, startled. "I didn't give them anything. I just stopped hiding." He stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "That's rarer than you think." We walked together through the hall, our footsteps echoing softly. "What made you say yes?" I asked. "To the foundation." He smiled faintly. "You did. People like you remind me what power's supposed to look like when it isn't pretending." I looked up at him. "So what now?" "Now," he said, "we build something honest. We start by making sure the foundation is clean." The rest of the day blurred into interviews, handshakes, photographs. But when it was over, when the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, I stayed behind, sitting alone in the empty hall that now carried my name. I thought of my brother, of that night at his party when the world had laughed and I had wanted to disappear. I hadn't heard from him since the gala. Maybe I never would. But in some quiet way I hoped he'd seen the news, not for revenge, but for reflection. Because I finally understood something I hadn't before: revenge doesn't rebuild anything. But truth does. When the janitor came in to start his shift, I stood and smiled. "Need a hand?" He looked startled. "Miss Navarro, you don't have to." "I know," I said, taking a broom from the corner. "But I want to." He laughed. "You're serious?" "As a stain on marble," I said. We worked in silence for a while, the kind that feels peaceful. Cleaning, sweeping, restoring order. And for the first time in years, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. Later that night, back in my apartment, I wrote a letter to my mother. I didn't know if she'd ever read it. I didn't even know if I'd send it. But I wrote it anyway. "Dear Mom, you were right. Cleaning isn't about dirt. It's about dignity. I spent years running from that truth because I thought the world would only respect me if I stopped being who I was. But the joke's on me. The only thing that ever made me powerful was the thing I tried to hide. Thank you for teaching me how to care enough to clean and clean enough to care. Love, Emma." I folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual noise sirens, traffic, laughter. But underneath it, there was something new, a kind of quiet that felt like peace. Before bed, I walked to the window. The Belmont stood tall in the distance, lights glowing against the night sky. I thought of all the people who'd passed through those doors, workers, investors, skeptics, dreamers. Every one of them had left a mark, visible or not. And somewhere among those marks was mine. I whispered into the glass, half a prayer, half a promise. Let it stay clean. Then I turned off the lights. The city kept moving. The story was finished. But the woman who'd once been mocked as the poor cleaning lady had rewritten her ending, and this time it was hers to keep. And if anyone ever asked me again who I was, I'd tell them simply, I'm the woman who learned that even dust can shine when you let the light in. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever laughed while calling you less, remember this: their laughter fades, but integrity echoes. Tell me, what would you have done if they'd called you the poor cleaning lady?